your head. Cause I'm KRS and I'm on the mic. And premieres on the hardcore hip hop. Going out to the hardcore.
Broadcast live and heard around the world, you are now listening to the most entertaining hour of radio on the planet. It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour presented by MyFFPC.com with your hosts Eric Balkman and Dave Gerzak. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour is your home for football analysis from the best fantasy players in the world. And now, because no one else was available, here are Eric Balkman and Dave Gerzak.
With the master rhymer, that's the lead behind the video rapper. You know the chalk primer, tapper.
Thank you so much, Rob. Greetings and salutations to all of the Balkaholics. Welcome to the latest episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour presented by MyFFPC.com. I'm your slightly above average host, Eric Balkman. We have an extra special show in store for you tonight. Joining me this week, not the Dizzle, not the patron saint of fantasy football, not Dave Gerzak, but a pair of former guests on this show, longtime FFPC players and High Stakes Dynasty champions. It is Biplab, Mandal, and Steve Lee. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Eric. Great to be here.
Thanks, Balky.
If you want to connect with us on Twitter, you can do so at HSFF Hour. I am at Eric Balkman. You can post on Facebook.com/HSFF Hour. I'm not going to give out the phone. I'm not going to give out the email because this is, to take you behind the curtain. This is a pre-recorded show that is airing here this Friday night. We recorded this the previous week. And we're kind of keeping this a little bit, I don't want to say bland, that's not the right word, but a little bit generic this week. So if there's any hard-hitting news that came out over the last, 5 or 6 days, we are not covering it tonight, and that's the reason why. So this is it's an interesting show tonight. It's one we haven't really done before. The way that this came about was Biplab actually pitched this to me a couple of months ago about how he and Steve have very different philosophies when it comes to building and maintaining dynasty leagues in the FFPC, and he thought it would be a very interesting, podcast episode, and I happen to agree with him. And by the way, if anybody ever has like an interesting idea or something they want to pitch, feel free. Tweet me at Eric Balkman at HSFF Hour. We'd love, what you guys think is interesting is probably going to be interesting to the rest of the high stakes players, and I think that you're going to see that tonight. So feel free to let us know, and we'd love to pitch that, or to record something like that. Before we get into it, Dynasty startups are forming at myffpc.com at the $77, $250, $500, and $750 level. And, of course, as always, best ball, super flex, and double ups available at myffpc.com. They've been that way since before the previous season ended. They've been out there. So definitely sign up for those. Obviously, the main event going on myffpc.com, a $500,000 grand prize in Football Guys Leagues will be here before you know it. Get your time and date now. So let's get into it, gentlemen. Biplab, I'm going to pitch this to you first since you were the one who initially reached out to me and said, hey, I think this would be really good. You and Steve obviously have gotten into spirited debates about the best way that you guys feel it is to build a high-stakes dynasty league. Let me just kind of pitch it to you first. What's your philosophy on it? And I'll let Steve talk about his in a second. But what's your philosophy and your experience been as far as the best way, the most successful way you have built up your dynasty teams in the past?
Sure, Balky. So, like you are aware, but not many listeners, I did not grow up in this part of the world. So football came to me very late. I used to be a cricket fan, and then the strategy and everything around fantasy football got me into this game. But what that means is someone like me I am not a scout, or I don't understand in detail a lot of technicalities and what many other high stake players might be into, right? So knowing that, I think the first and foremost, the most important thing for me has been to understand what my strengths are, what my weaknesses are, and then how do I go about building a very good fantasy football team, right? So now when it comes to dynasties, the good thing is you always get a second chance. So even if you mess up your first draft, or even if you buy a bad team, you have ways and means to extend that team. And that's where I feel someone like me, my strengths come in, right? So I focus a lot on trading as a strategy, because I know that many times when it comes to picking rookies or nailing those rookie picks, I might not be the best person, right? So I keep it very simple. I focus on my strength, which is basically networking with people, connecting with people, making trades, and then sustaining my roster that way. Now, in that process, I believe in one philosophy, which is buy people at low and then sell them at high, pretty much like how you run in a stock market, right? And I have seen over the years that strategy has worked for me. So every year at the beginning of the year, I'll try to buy players who nobody is talking about or people are a little negative about, and then sell players at their high. For example, this year I have been selling Damian Williams for a 2020 first in a lot of leagues, right? So those are the types of strategies I use. And then, someone in FFPC 501 was telling me the other day that I am probably the only person who networks with everyone in that league and probably gets along with everybody.
Yeah.
Because I have also seen some people have high egos, and you can often clash with them there, right? So I use networking, communication, and then trading as a tool to build some very good dynasty teams that I've been successful in.
Yeah, I think that you bring up an interesting point, and this is, we all get bad dynasty trade offers all the time. Happens to everybody. But I think the knee-jerk reaction is to feel personally offended when somebody sends you a deal like, for my Ezekiel Elliott, you're going to offer me, Tyler Boyd and a second round pick. And I think the initial knee-jerk reaction is like, that is awful. What do you think I am, an idiot? And that's the wrong reaction to have, because you want to keep, you have 11 bridges essentially up in your league, and you want to keep those bridges built and not burnt as long as possible. And something as simple as taking something personally like that can burn a bridge, and you'll never be able to trade with that guy again as long as he stays in the league. So I think the whole networking angle is totally true. And I think the way that you have described how you build your dynasty is like, look, I recognize I'm not the greatest rookie scout in the world, but what I am good at is trading. And I think, probably the best coach and one of the best GMs in the real NFL is Bill Belichick, and I think he's recognized that at least as far as receivers go. It's very rare that New England has hit on receivers in the draft. I mean, it's happened, but it doesn't happen a whole lot. And what does he do? He goes out and fills that position different ways. So I think that you are spot on as far as knowing the importance of recognizing your strengths, recognizing your weaknesses, and taking it from there. Steve, your philosophy, I want to get into how you like to do it, and how it differs from what Biplab just told us.
Yeah, well, I guess to piggyback on Bib's stock market analogy, I guess I'd be what you call a buy and hold guy rather than a high volume kind of value trader. I do believe trading is indispensable part of your armory in terms of building a dynasty team. Don't get me wrong, but I do make fewer trades than probably a lot of other guys, and they tend to be more what I call strategic in nature rather than tactical. And by that I mean I'm not too worried about whether I'm gaining or losing in the individual trade in terms of market value, but am I getting what I want strategically in terms of the relative strength and weaknesses of my team. So in other words, trading strength at wide receiver for strength at running back or for tight end or for whatever it is. Or maybe if I'm in rebuilding mode, I'm trading away veteran productivity for unproven youth or draft picks, that kind of thing. So as a result, I do rely more on the rookie draft for, if you like, an infusion of productivity and talent, as well as obviously, the waiver wire, which, even in the, the high stakes environment of FFPC can still be a productive area. So that's kind of a thumbnail sketch of the different approach, I guess.
Steve, you talk about that and how you're a little bit more selective in your trades, and you are not necessarily concerned with winning every trade, always getting the best value, but making sure that whatever deal you do, your team gets better after that trade. I'm curious, do you find yourself, as a result of that, not like, oftentimes I'll get a deal and I'll think it's decent, but I'll think I can do better. And then I'll, be hitting up other owners in the league and seeing what I can get and trying, it's sort of like how the Houston Rockets have done it in the NBA over the course of the better part of a decade, where they will make a million trades and just get incrementally better at every single one until they're at the upper echelon of the league. And for me, I'll get a deal offered to me. I'm thinking, yeah, that's pretty good, but I think I can do better. And then I'll hit up 3, 4, 5, 6 other teams to see if I can do a little bit better. Do you find yourself, Steve, like sort of striking right on that first deal when like, okay, I'm clearly getting better here. I'm going to make this deal. I'm not going to mess around and potentially lose this trade that's in front of me right now. Do you feel like that you do less shopping and more buying that way?
Yes, I think that's a fair statement. I mean, I do not, I don't think I'm personally good at the high volume trading where you're making a ton of trades, where you're trying to get an incremental value on each one and then moving that guy on and hoping when the music stops that, my team's going to be better. Because I don't think it would be. I think I'm more likely to probably lose in that process than win. So, yeah, I tend to be more circumspect and restrict myself to more what I term strategic trading in that sense.
The off season is always a hotbed of FFPC trades. I'm curious, Biplab, have you made a deal that's been a blockbuster that you're particularly proud of, or something that sort of changed the landscape as far as any of your teams gone? What's the biggest trade or the most important trade that you've made so far here coming into the 2019 NFL year?
Sure. Before I get to that, one comment on Steve's strategy, though, is, I've been impressed over the last 3 years as to how Steve has nailed some picks in some of the leagues I've been with him, like, drafting George Kittle at 412. And then he drafted Cooper Kupp, I think, in 310 or somewhere, wow. Right? And in other leagues, he has drafted Calvin Ridley over some of the popular names, right? And I have even shared with him that feedback that someone like me will never do it. So there is some kind of secret tool that Steve has to evaluate these talents and get them and then hold them, and he's pretty adamant about trading them. So I think that strategy works for when you are as good as Steve is, but then for people like me, I am never going to nail that, and so that's where the trading aspect comes. And the great thing with dynasties is you can probably build great teams with both the strategies, as long as you know, again, what your strengths and competencies are, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, again, I don't think you say, one strategy is better than another, or one approach is better than another. And Bip is very good at the trading and the networking piece, and he certainly does that a lot better than I do. And he also, I think it takes a certain, mental capacity to, or nerve perhaps is the right word, to handle multiple trades where you're cycling these players through your roster, and you're prepared to, if you like, disrupt the structure of your team because you're confident that at the end of it, you're going to end up with a stronger team. So it is, definitely they're different skill sets, but both, definitely valid approaches to building the team.
Well, and it's like you guys have said, like, look, I know what I'm good at. I know what I'm not good at. And as a result, I know how I'm going to build a really good dynasty team. You guys clearly recognize that, and I think that's sort of like the first step, too. Right, Biplab?
Yeah, and I think that's the key, right? that's the common part in both the strategies. Both of us know what we are good at and what we are best working with, right? And that is so important, in these high stakes. Otherwise, you will be all over the place and chasing tails. Coming to your trade question, I think one trade I'm really proud of because I really, really wanted that player in my roster, because out of my 10, 12 FFPC teams, I don't have him anywhere, and that's DeAndre Hopkins. So I made a trade this offseason where I traded away Davante Adams and couple of second-round picks for DeAndre Hopkins and couple of third-round picks. And I do feel I got the better player in that deal. I mean, I like Adams, I like Rodgers, although I feel, it'll be interesting to see what Green Bay does in the rookie draft. But if I'm getting a talent as good as DeAndre Hopkins for that trade, I will take it any day. And so that's the big trade I am pretty proud of this offseason.
Bip, how much did it factor in, and I don't know when you exactly made the trade, but how much did it factor in knowing that DeAndre Hopkins was going to be staying in the same offense that he's been in basically his whole career, and that Davante Adams was going to be learning a new one with Matt LaFleur coming to Green Bay? Did that factor into the decision at all?
So second part of it factored a bit, and that's where the gamble comes in, right? Again, so Davante, this trade happened, I think, couple of weeks back, so not long back. But what I have realized over the years is that Rodgers is getting older and little injury prone. I think the Vikings and the Bears have very good defenses that are improving, and then the Lions with Patricia around, I expect them to also get better on defense, right? And then Davante Adams has had a couple of very good runs, but until I look at his season last year, the numbers, other year, his numbers have not been that elite. He's put up good WR1 numbers, but I wouldn't put it in the elite category. And then when it came to learning a new offense, that was the biggest factor for me. A lot of people don't realize that because they think Green Bay and Aaron Rodgers, and that means a lot of passing, right? But this offensive coordinator came from Tennessee, I think, and I didn't see Corey Davis light it up there. So, that was a factor. And then Hopkins is also, connected to a very young quarterback who is younger than Rodgers. And then Adams and Hopkins are of same age. So I just wanted Hopkins. I think he's the best receiver at the moment in the league. And so, I thought that it was a value trade for me.
Yeah,
we'll see how it pans out.
I agree with everything you said, and I also agree. I think you got the better talent in there too. I mean, Davante Adams is awesome. DeAndre Hopkins is really awesome. Steve, what about you? Have you made any deals that you've been particularly proud of since the Super Bowl?
I haven't really made any massive deals this offseason. It's been some fairly minor deals, but I do want to talk about one trade that actually Bip and I made a year ago, because I think it bears on this conversation in terms of it was a trade that I think we both walked away from happy, and I think it fit. We each got what we wanted in terms of our own kind of strategies, and this was in the 500 number one league, and at the time I had great strength at wide receiver and virtually nothing at running back, and so I made a trade to Biff. I traded him Odell Beckham Jr. for Joe Mixon and the 108. Now, at the time on paper, this was after Mixon was coming off a relatively mediocre rookie season, and at the time on paper it looked like, well, I'd probably given up value. In fact, Biff and I exchanged some thoughts after the trade, and I think I'll let Biff comment, but I think Biff said something to the effect of, well, I probably wouldn't have made that trade if I'd have been on your end of it from a value standpoint. But I turned the 108 into Kerryon Johnson, which, the way the rookies that, in 2017, that I was fairly confident I had a decent shot at getting him with that pick. And so I ended up with Mixon and Kerryon Johnson, and Biff ended up with Odell Beckham. And, I've been able to replace that lost wide receiver talent through the draft with the likes of Kupp and Ridley and a few other guys. And it was a trade that I think worked out well for both of us.
And that's all you're trying to do. I mean, you're trying. It's not and this is great. 'Cause I can bring this up tonight because Dave's not on the show. I can borrow a baseball analogy. But like if you're trying to improve your team in say like a rotisserie baseball league where you have to fill certain categories, which you're not really doing that in fantasy football, but you kind of are because you're trying to start in the most dominant lineup every single week. And if you have a glut of receivers and not enough backs, or if you have a ton of running backs and not enough wideouts, sometimes it's okay to give, 80, 75 cents on the dollar for a certain guy just to get him in the lineup, because even though you might have made your team as a whole maybe a little bit weaker, you've actually made it better because now you have the opportunity to play a lot of these guys every single week in the same starting lineup that you didn't have before. And you're making the team in your starting lineup or the team on the field better at the expense of maybe losing a little incremental depth on your roster. So I'm totally on board with that. And I think that's something that, even I struggle with certain times. I always want to win every deal, but it's not always about that as well. Now, Steve, I want to ask you sort of like, and I know Biplab's probably curious too, the secret sauce here that you've been able to hit on these rookie picks. Has it just been sheer volume that you've been successful at getting guys like Cooper Kupp and George Kittle late? Is there a certain process or a vetting strategy that you do with assessing the talent of these rookies and then the landing spot? What's worked for you as far as nailing these rookie picks as much as you can?
Well, so I do rely on obviously the rookie draft to get talent pretty heavily, and so I put in a lot of time preparing for the rookie drafts, and I'm basically triangulating information. I mean, I'm an analytical guy by nature, and so the whole rookie player analysis, I that comes relatively easily to me. So I'm triangulating really data from three areas: the college productivity in terms of market share, breakout age, their on-field performance, yards after contact, forced missed tackles, all of that kind of stuff. Then their athletic metrics in the combine, which I track with a fair amount of detail, and then finally my own game film analysis. And I don't have the bandwidth to watch a lot of college games live, on a Saturday during the season. So January through April is a pretty intensive period of watching game film, plus, as I say, bringing together all these other sources of data. And then I'll end up with a rookie board, which is, has about 60, 70 players on it, ranked, obviously. And that's basically what I do.
Yeah, I mean it's just a matter of and it works for you, clearly, the whatever rubric or whatever strategy you've been using, like, hey, I'm gonna make sure I target this guy, maybe trade up a couple of spots if I'm gonna get a chance to get him. I'm gonna fade this guy in case somebody wants to trade up for him. I'll be more than happy to move down and grab somebody else. So I think that is the right approach there, and it certainly has been successful for you. Biplab, this is something I've, it's one of those things once I've learned about it, and then the struggle is, okay, I have to understand this is not a hard and fast rule, but there is something to be said for players, whether it's a running back when they hit 30, whether it's a receiver when they hit 32, whether it's a tight end when they hit 33, 34, what have you. Do you ever find that there is a right quote unquote age to sell on a particular player at a particular position in Dynasty? Or is it just such a sliding scale for you that you have to take it on a case-by-case basis?
No, great question, Balky. But I have learned over the years, and I have been successful in a dynasty. I won this year 506. So that's where it was actually I bought a team of the waivers. Whatever you guys were selling, it was not a good team. It was an older team. And for the first time, I sold all the running backs who were around 28, 29 years old. So I had players like DeMarco Murray, LeSean McCoy, and all those older guys. And I sold them for a future first, and then basically nailed the draft last year, luckily, which I would say, like, getting the likes of Christian McCaffrey and Joe Mixon and because those picks converted into those type of players, right? The year I did, and then finally had a powerhouse team that won this year. I think I went 13-0 and then
Wow.
won it. Yeah, it's really a team that I am proud of, but I made some good trades there, like Adam Thielen, buying him at a low, right? And then Davante Adams, buying him when everyone thought he was a bust, right? Those two guys contributed to that dynasty. Anyways, so I do feel that, in leagues where I am not competitive and I know there are better teams, which I can say whatever I want to the world, but at the bottom of my heart, I believe they are better teams than what I have. I will start selling running backs if they are getting to 28, 29 zone, right? So right now in another league, I'm trying to sell receivers who are over 30 years, including Antonio Brown and Julio Jones. I own both of them, but I have a feeling I'm not going to win that league, right? So that's where for receivers after 30, I start figuring out the market and selling them on their high. Running backs around 28, 29, and then tight ends are so scarce right now that, unless you are one of those top 3 or 4 guys, I just rate them all fine, and I will rather go and search for Chris Herndon in the waivers, right? Or so that's kind of where I am at with some of those players. And then I know many dynasty players may not like my strategy, but I really don't care about quarterbacks, no matter if you are Patrick Mahomes, but you can only play 12 quarterbacks. So I will just take value in quarterback and punt at that position.
I'm totally with you on quarterbacks. I'm in another dynasty league where it was an orphan team, and I picked it up last year. And Dave Gerzak was in it, and I was talking about how, it's a similar FFPC type format league. There's no tight end premium scoring in it, but I was telling him these quarterbacks, I just need to transform them into assets, and I ended up trading. I had Deshaun Watson in that league, and I traded him with, I'm trying to think who my backup was. My backup, the only other quarterback I had on my roster was Ryan Tannehill or something like that. It was bad. But I traded Deshaun Watson for the 112 in the rookie draft that year, and I'm listen, I'm going to stick to my strategy here of quarterbacks, and I get a first round pick for him. I'm totally on board with that, and it actually caused not an uproar, but a lot of people kind of raised an eyebrow at that. And I think I took Cortland Sutton at the 112 for it, which I'm still totally on board with. And then this offseason in that same league, some guy was trying to trade me Marcus Mariota in exchange for the 201 this year. And I said to him, you realize I'm the guy last year that traded Deshaun Watson for the 112. So I'm probably gonna let's think of something else here. So I'm totally on board with you as far as the quarterbacks go. Steve, I want to ask you about the tight ends, because as Biplab just pointed out, they're not plentiful right now. If you find one, you hold on to it like grim death. I had in that same league, I had a guy that was trying to get Travis Kelce from me, and I really wanted to do a deal with him because he's sending me all these really solid offers. But in the end, it just made more sense to keep Kelce. I'm curious. What about the rookie tight ends? What about these tight ends? And certainly there's exceptions to every rule. But most of the time, these rookie tight ends, they get to the NFL and they struggle year one. In a tight end premium format with short benches, how do you treat these rookie tight ends? I mean, are you okay with letting them marinate on your roster for a year? Is it worth it for you to do that? What's been your experience with that?
The short answer to that is yes, I am. I mean, I personally, and I'm maybe different from the norm on this, but I view tight ends and rookie tight ends as long-term assets. In fact, I think for a patient owner, and obviously I consider myself one of those, I think this is an area where you can get real long-term value differential over your competitors. For example, I have a number of shares of David Njoku. Now, he's basically sat on my roster for 2 years, and I may have started him a couple of times when I absolutely needed to. But going forward, I think in this year and beyond, he's going to be a consistent, high-performing tight end one for the next, barring catastrophic injury, 7 or 8 years. Now, when you add that 7 or 8 years to the 2 years I've had it, that's like a 10-year horizon. Now, I know that's an anathema to a lot of people to think that kind of long term, but I think you do need to accept that the tight ends are really not going to produce, I mean, with certain notable exceptions, for the first 2-3 years that you have them. So it is a long-term investment.
Let's talk Biplab. Let's talk about the short rosters in the FFPC. You know, there's plenty of people on Twitter that will say, well, the FFPC, I mean, they have dynasty leagues, but they're really kind of keeper leagues because you have to cut down to so few players as you know, prior to the draft at all. Is there a way, you know, knowing that you have been playing in these dynasty formats at the FFPC for several years now, is there a way to use that to your advantage at all, or is this sort of a handicap that everyone kind of has to deal with?
No, I think it makes FFPC leagues more fun. I think it makes it easier for a bad team to be turned around. I do think in FFPC you can turn around bad teams in 2-3 years because of this short roster, right? If you manage it well. Now, what Steve was saying, you know, one of my personal struggles with rookie tight ends have been holding them in a 16-team roster, right? So unless you are as good as Steve, where you can nail other picks, it really gets difficult and frustrating. For example, Hayden Hurst, you know, he's frustrating. And then, you know, Trey Burton, all the years he was in Philadelphia, it was frustrating, right? And now they have Goddard over there, you know, and so players like that, right? But for me to play it smart in a 16-team roster, I strongly feel that you should always keep one quarterback, you know, again, no matter what the names are. Even if it is a Philip Rivers, Ben Roethlisberger, I would rather have them in the 16-team roster and then find someone in the waiver. So that is number one. I also feel if you have an elite tight end, like you have a Travis Kelce or a Zach Ertz and even now George Kittle, if you have one of those type of players, then try to have only another tight end, because, you know, tight ends are not that deep, and after a certain rank, you know, they are all same. And then spend a lot more on running backs and wide receivers and build a depth, right? That's where I have been successful in leagues that I have won, and I don't have elite tight ends. In fact, I don't have Travis Kelce or Zach Ertz anywhere, you know, and so that has worked for me, and I always try to keep one quarterback in my roster.
No, listen, it makes perfect sense for me to operate that way with this. Guys, I don't know if, you know, how early you start your rookie prep, but, you know, the combine's behind us. Players are meeting with teams. The draft, I think, is going to be here, well, from where we're recording today, about 31 days away. So it'll be here before we know it. Steve, are there any rookies that you particularly like this season, or maybe some rookies that have raised some red flags with you that you know, that, listen, no matter where they end up in their landing spot, I'm probably not drafting them. Are there any players like that for you in 2019?
Well, yeah, there are. I mean, so let's talk some generalities first. I mean, I think we all are aware that the strength and depth of this draft class lies in wide receivers and tight ends, and not so much in, obviously, the running backs. In fact, you know, I personally, and I'm still in the middle of my evaluation, obviously, but I found that this group of running backs particularly hard to evaluate compared to recent years, because while several of them have one or two really positive traits, they also have some glaring weaknesses in their game, and it's difficult to predict how they will translate to the NFL. I mean, I do think that this class, more than any other, opportunity is going to matter.
Yep.
So where these guys land is going to be a bigger factor. I mean, it's not like, I remember last year I had the 102 in one of my leagues, and I was taking Nick Chubb come hell or high water because I knew Saquon Barkley was going first, but I was going to take Nick Chubb. I didn't care where he landed. And there isn't a player like that in this, certainly not a running back in this draft who's like that. I mean, I think there are some productive running backs, or will be productive if they get into the right situation. But it's going to be very dependent on landing spots. In wide receiver, obviously, I personally think N'Keal Harry should be the consensus 101. He's as near to a can't-miss prospect in my mind as you can get, certainly in this draft class. I also love DK Metcalf. I know he's been a polarizing figure in the Twitter sphere because, people are concerned about his lateral agility and back that up with a relatively poor three cone at the combine. But, I think he's got a prototypical X receiver who's going to make his living on go routes, post routes, slant routes. And so I'm not too worried about that. And in fact, watching him at the combine, he got in and out of his breaks just fine as far as I was concerned. So I really like him. And yeah, so those are some, at the top end of the draft class. But there's some good receivers. I mean, I think later on, a little guy like Andy Isabella, very productive in college. If he gets into the right system, he's got an elite lateral agility, put up an elite three cone at the combine. He's a guy, I think, who could be surprisingly productive. So I think there's going to be some really good players taken in this draft. But like I said, the running backs are a bit of a minefield.
Biplab, are there any players, either good or bad, that are standing out for you that are going to hear their names called coming up at the end of April at the NFL draft?
Well, I agree to a lot of things Steve said, and I think the key this year in the draft will be who goes where. For example, someone like DK Metcalf, if Baltimore drafts him, I don't know if I want to touch him there, right? So I'm even having a hard time evaluating the receivers this year. I feel there is volume or there is depth, but it's not easy to say who is going to be the number one. For example, I do have a lot of respect for how Steve evaluates receivers, but I actually feel that N'Keal Harry has a bust potential. He might be another Laquan Treadwell, right? So there's those kind of views. I actually like Hakeem Butler. I've watched some highlights and he's from Iowa State, and again, in right system, I feel he might do well. I'm excited about tight ends, though, but again, they are long-term prospects. For example, someone like Noah Fant, who can catch passes. Think about Patriots drafting him. So those are the types of things that might excite me. But otherwise, what I have been trying to do, Balki, is sell 2019 picks and get 2020 picks because I feel I have a better chance of nailing some picks next year.
Let's talk about and get into this before we get into some individual players and by the list that we have compiled here. Maybe there's actually going to be some players here that you're going to bring up in this next part. But Biplab, any players that you have on your dynasty leagues, or if you did have them on your dynasty teams, you'd be looking to sell them right now. Whether they you mentioned Damian Williams before. I think he's a good sell high guy. Is there anybody else that I mean, we'll throw sell high guys into the conversation, but maybe a guy that you think, okay, this isn't a sell high guy, but I think his value is going to go down again in 2019. Are there any players that you'd be looking to move right now for something else?
Many may not like this, but again, a big name guy that I am trying to trade, but it has to be a stud for stud type trade, is Juju Smith-Schuster. With Brown gone, I feel he will get more attention, and will be interesting to see how he steps in as a true elite receiver one. And I somehow feel his value is pretty sky high right now, and if I can trade Juju and get players like DeAndre Hopkins in that trade, I would do that, right? So he's one player I'm trying to sell, other than players like Antonio Brown that I'm trying to sell. On the running back front, I am still not 100% sold on James Conner. I feel he's injury prone and the sample size is not high. So he's another one I'm trying to trade at a high value and get some more reliable assets.
Steve, what about you? Are there anybody on your rosters that you're trying to cleanse yourself of and get some, either picks or different players in exchange for them?
Well, one guy comes to mind is AJ Green on my 12-50 number 2 team. This is I won the title in 2017, and I held on to him, expecting to compete for the title again in 2018. But, although I made the playoffs, really my team took a bit of a step backwards. So I'm going to be looking at potentially moving him on. But if I do it, it will be in season because then at least I can get better value for him. He won't be coming off an injury. So I'll likely trade him in the season if I do that.
Steve, conversely, are there any buy lows or players that you are higher on than the rest of the high stakes players or dynasty players in general? Are there anybody out there that you've been sending some offers for to see if you can get him maybe a little bit on the cheap before his value spikes?
I'd love to get Chris Godwin. I've always been a big fan of Chris Godwin, and I think his arrow is definitely pointing up with, now that the logjam of receivers in Tampa Bay has been sorted out a little bit. Unfortunately, his price is already high. Most owners who have been holding him because they believe in him, and they're looking for a first or even a first and something else in order to give up Chris Godwin. So, that's been – I haven't managed to acquire him yet. I think there's a couple of running backs that you can acquire relatively cheaply that I think have some upside. I think Kenyon Drake is an example. Not as your RB1, but, I think he could be a solid RB2 for your team. And then I think there's some tight ends that you can get really cheaply. Again, going back to the fact that a lot of people aren't patient with tight ends. And so I'm thinking of a couple of guys who are sitting behind veterans who probably only have one more year left, and that's Jonnu Smith, sitting behind Delaney Walker right now in Tennessee. I'm pretty high on him, and he's looking like, I've seen from some of the message boards, he's on a lot of people's roster bubble by the looks of it. And then Ian Thomas in Carolina. Because Greg Olsen is going to hang it up. In fact, I thought he might even retire this offseason. So I think Ian Thomas there in Carolina has, so the value of those tight ends could really explode once they become regular starters.
Biplab, I'll ask you the same question. I'll also frame it this way. What about players that as Steve alluded to, these tight ends that maybe are slow to come along, or maybe somebody uses a late first round pick in a rookie draft on like a Gesicki or a Hurst or some tight end like that didn't have an Evan Engram-esque season and they get frustrated with, or I'll even use the example of a pretty popular running back last year in Ronald Jones, a guy that I think a lot of people, myself included, was high on, and he did not have the rookie season that I think I was and many people were hoping for. What about these players that were highly touted coming into rookie drafts that don't have a great rookie season? Are you on board with buying them up and seeing if you can acquire them on the cheap?
Well, I'm not into Gesicki and Hurst, although, a couple of last year's rookie tight ends that I'm trying to buy at a value price are Mark Andrews and Chris Herndon. Right, I like those two guys. I'm no scout, but I feel they might have a good future ahead. So those are two guys. Ronald Jones, I was a big fan of him last year. I am not going to overpay and proactively buy him, but if I get him for a late second, I might be tempted to get him, or if he's on my roster, I'm going to hold him. Because like Steve was mentioning, this year's running back class is not looking great, and then they have a running back friendly coach, and so who is his competition? Is it going to be the best competition I can see is Josh Jacobs? Then it is Josh Jacobs, Ronald Jones, and Peyton Barber. I do feel he stands a chance there, right, to compete and be the running back. So that's what it is, but I'm not going to pay a first round pick and invest in him, right? So it's a value trade that has to happen for me. And the same thing about Mark Andrews and Chris Herndon, players like them. The other player who nobody thinks of, but I'm trying to buy at a value price is Jalen Samuels of the Steelers. I would rather have him at a value price and sell James Conner at a high. That's kind of been my strategy there.
We have roughly 15, 16 minutes left or so, and before we kind of call it a night, I want to get into some of the players that I just listed, like 10 players here. I think I have a list of 10 that to me I guess I'm not sure what to do with if I own them in Dynasty right now. Are they buys? Are they sells? Are they holds? What are you doing with them in Biplab? I'll ask you first. Todd Gurley. I mean, a lot of the basically ever since the end of the regular season, it's just been bad news after bad news of Todd Gurley. I'm not sure how much we can take at face value what Sean McVay is saying about him. We're hearing the reports of arthritis in the knee and all this other stuff. And for a guy who is coming off really an historic season, this is not what you want to hear coming into the following season. So if you own Gurley, or if you were going to make a deal for Gurley, how do you sort of approach what you'd give up or what you'd accept back in return for him right now, and your thoughts really on his long-term dynasty value as well?
Yep. So long-term dynasty value, I do feel that this news breaking out has caused some shivers and panic, but I equally feel because of these news, it has made Gurley a tradable asset, because in the past, Gurley means don't touch him, right? I have made couple of off-season trades, they are 250 dynasty leagues, but still 250, where I have given away two current first round picks and have obtained Gurley. Now again, I don't have a high valuation of this year's draft class, so I thought I would rather have the upside of Gurley than those two first round picks. And I'm pretty stacked on wide receivers in that league. I think if I'm a Gurley owner, I'm going to hold him because I don't think people want to pay a lot because of these news. And so, I'm not going to sell him for cheap. I do feel there are some questions long term, but I still feel, it's Todd Gurley, and if he makes past this news, he can win you seasons single-handedly.
Steve, do you share that viewpoint on Gurley? I mean, is this a guy that if you own him anywhere, you're kind of holding, but you are a little nervous about making an offer for him right now?
Yeah, I do share that view. I actually do own Gurley in one of my 1250 leagues, and he's a definite hold right now. I mean, I think this cloud hanging over him, over the state of his knee and exactly how degenerative this condition is. I mean, that situation is going to get clearer. In fact, it could easily be dispelled if Gurley goes out and runs for 500 yards in the first 4 games of the season. No one's going to be thinking about this. So he's a definite hold right now. I do think we need to do as much research as possible to get a sense of what his long-term value is. But yeah, he's definitely a hold for now. And a lot of this could be forgotten if he looks fine at the start of the season.
Another guy that's going to be taken in redraft leagues, at least in the first round, and has been the newest New York Jet, Le'Veon Bell, a guy that enjoyed a lot of success, Steve, in Pittsburgh over the course of his career. He is going to a team now that it's good and bad. I mean, he is going to be the focal point of that offense, but the bad is he is really the only focal point of that offense right now to speak of. How do you treat Le'Veon Bell for Dynasty? Is this a guy that you want to go after right now? Is this a guy that you want to sell before people are seeing this Jets offense slog along? If it is in fact going to slog along, I don't have a good read on the situation. But your thoughts on Le'Veon Bell for Dynasty right now?
Yeah, I mean, for me, he is a sell, and he's a sell because I think you can get really good value for him right now. He's currently being drafted in redraft leagues, in large part based on memories of his productivity in Pittsburgh, and he's obviously now not in anything like as good a situation with the Jets. I mean, he likely won't see the same volume. The team isn't as good, and the Jets simply won't have the same number of offensive plays. And you add that to the fact his age, he's probably got a 2-3 year window of high productivity. Yeah, I think if you're a Bell owner, you've got to seriously be thinking of fielding offers, provided you can get the right value.
Biplab, have you moved Le'Veon Bell in any of your leagues at all in the last, whatever it's been, 3 or 4 weeks since he signed, or 2 weeks, whatever it was since he signed with the Jets?
Well, I have actually bought Le'Veon Bell. Again, part of it is, we do have short-term memories as fantasy football players. I mean, I get it. He's in New York Jets, but that's all they have. I think they have a good tight end in Chris Herndon, and then a young quarterback, and then Adam Gase, who used to be a very good offensive coordinator, very creative back in his days, and I think he gets to work with him. I mean, Bell can easily catch 70 passes, and that's 70 free points for you. So I am buying him because I can buy him for a first round pick. I think that's where I have got him. I do feel Bell will be fine this year, assuming he doesn't get any injuries. He will put up Bellisk numbers. But I do agree with Steve that his long-term valuation is limited. It's probably you are looking at another 3 years or 4 years. But if that is also the case, I would rather get his productivity out of him this year and then sell him versus selling him now.
Yeah, and I should add, here we come now to the secret sauce of Bip with his trading. I mean, if you can get Le'Veon Bell for a first-round pick, yeah, I mean, I'm buying all day long. But if I'm the Bell owner, I'm looking for something more than a first-round pick.
That's what I paid, Steve, in 501.
Well, there you go. I mean, that's, yeah.
Well
done.
Let me ask you this, guys, because this is a deal that I got offered. Was it today or is it yesterday? I think it was today. My Mike Evans for his Le'Veon Bell. Would you guys have flipped Evans for Bell?
I will go Evans all day.
Yeah, I would take the Evans end of that, and that's another example. I mean, if you say, let's say Evans is equal to Bell, I mean, you're looking for a lot more than the first round pick for Mike Evans, aren't you?
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah,
even if Bells was on Steelers, I would still go Evans because he's young, he's a receiver, he's I mean.
Yeah, I mean I'd take the Evans end of that all day long. But I still think you got a tremendous deal getting Lev Bell for simply a first round pick.
Yep.
Yeah, it's what he does well, apparently. And,
it is.
And congratulations to you on that, Biplab, because I would have been all over that as well. Let's move on to Odell Beckham here, Biplab. And this is a guy who, there's no question he's moving to a better quarterback situation. However, he's moving to a crowded talent situation with Jarvis Landry, David Njoku, who, we heard Steve talk about earlier about he expects big things from him going forward, not to mention the running game of Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, at least for the second half of 2019. What do you do with Odell Beckham? I own him in one Dynasty league. I think I haven't really shopped him at all. I don't think I'm going to really get my doors blown off with a great trade offer. But I don't know. I think his value's gone up a little bit, but maybe not that much. What do you think?
Yep. I mean, you are right. You are spot on. So if I'm an OBJ owner, I'm not selling him. I'm anyways an OBJ fan. And Steve was telling you, what I sold Mixon and 1.8 to get OBJ. But I am also not going to buy OBJ proactively right now because I think the value is going to be higher and I'm not willing to pay that. So he's kind of a hold candidate at the moment for me.
Steve, have you noticed that in your high stakes leagues too, that the Beckham owner just, and I don't know if you've been poking around to see what the going rate is, but have you noticed that there's a certain inflated sense of Beckham's value currently?
Yeah, I mean, I think Beckham's value has gone up. He definitely gets a bump in dynasty value by having his future tied to Baker Mayfield in Cleveland, particularly what that team is doing right now offensively in terms of the other personnel. So I do think he's a buy if you can afford him. But, if we go back to a year ago, I mean, Beckham was worth 2 first-round draft picks or the equivalent of 2 first-round draft picks at least back then when he was with the Giants. So he's going to come with a pretty hefty price tag now. So it's going to be very difficult, I think, to acquire it.
Steve, we already heard Biplab talking about how he's looking to move Antonio Brown right now. How many quote unquote elite seasons or let's say WR1 seasons does Antonio Brown have left now that he is an Oakland Raider catching passes, at least we think, from Derek Carr and maybe somebody else going forward, but it looks like Derek Carr right now. Your thoughts on Antonio Brown's next couple of years in the NFL?
Well, actually, Bip and I will be talking after this because I think Antonio Brown is a buy if you're a certainly if you're a contending team. He's getting marked down a bit because he's left the Steelers and he's gone to the Raiders, and we've seen that the Raiders have not looked good in recent years offensively. But I think he's going to vacuum up a ton of targets. He's still an outstanding receiver. He works at his craft. He's in outstanding shape. Despite all of the nonsense he's been putting out on the social media, he's actually takes his craft very seriously. And I think particularly now with Tyrell Williams there to kind of stretch the field, I think Antonio Brown's going to get a ton of targets.
Yep. So
go ahead, Biplab.
Just to add a thought, I think I agree with that. I mean, the leagues where I'm trying to sell Antonio Brown, I know I'm not going to win it. There are 2-3 better teams than I, and I'm trying to even see if I can get 2 firsts equivalent for him. Then I would rather move a 31-year-old receiver. I think he will be fine for this year. Gruden has done well with older receivers, and this is the best talent he's got on that team.
So Bip, maybe this is where your skills come in. After the 2019 season, you turn Antonio Brown into something really special if you have him.
Yep. Because I feel next year the class is going to be good. So if I can get 2 firsts, I can draft some good receivers like Judy and those guys.
Steve, let's talk about Antonio Brown's old teammate in Pittsburgh in Juju Smith-Schuster. Now, Bip talked about him a little bit previously. My concern with Smith-Schuster is that while he had an absolutely boffo year last year, it was crazy. The majority of the season hit Antonio Brown on the opposite side, drawing attention from him. 2019 JJSS is going to have, Dante Moncrief, James Washington, whoever opposite him. How does that change his fantasy value, if at all, and really dynasty value as well going forward now that he is the guy in Pittsburgh?
Well, I still like Juju Smith-Schuster. I mean, I think obviously there are some concerns with the fact he's going to get more defensive attention, but the guy is incredibly talented. He's also incredibly young. And, that I think counts for a lot when you look at his age and what he's already achieved. And, the fact that he's still got to runway ahead of him in terms of improving his productivity. So, I think he's actually a buy for me. I really like the guy. I think his arrows pointing up.
And obviously he already has he's staying in the same offense, well-established relationship with Ben Roethlisberger, same offensive coordinator, same coach there, so a lot of things going Juju Smith-Schuster's way as far as 2019 goes, no doubt. Now,
and don't forget about James Washington there too. I mean, that guy's got a boatload of talent, so I expect him to get a lot of attention too. I mean, he'll be drawing a lot of targets, and in fact, he's probably the big winner in terms of his upside with the departure of Brown.
Steve, have you made any offers for Washington in your leagues? Have you acquired him anywhere?
I haven't actually, but I may do that. I may be putting out some offers for him.
And the other thing too is, and maybe this is just taking a step forward, and I'm making something where there's nothing here, but with Cleveland taking the step forward, I think there's a lot of people that are concerned about, especially the way the Steelers' season ended last year. I don't know. Perhaps they're going to be losing more games this year. Perhaps they're going to be in more shootouts. And to me, that with all those targets going west to Oakland with Antonio Brown, I mean, Juju Smith-Schuster could. I don't want to say he's going to have a bigger 2019 than 2018, but it might not be far off.
Right. I still think he's going to have a very big season.
His backfield teammate there in Pittsburgh is James Conner. Now, Biplab talked a little bit about him before, Steve. He's going in the first round of FFPC redrafts right now. Is he the guy in Pittsburgh? Do you think they bring in somebody to go along with him and Samuels that's going to turn this into a 3-headed monster? Because we saw he was very, very successful being the man last year. He was even getting goal line when Le'Veon Bell wasn't really getting a whole lot of goal line in those similar situations. James Conner for Dynasty right now, I think if you wanted to flip him, and I don't know if you feel like you should, you could probably get a lot for him right now.
Yeah, I mean, I echo a lot of what Bibb said earlier about James Conner. I mean, I think he's a sell here. I mean, a strong sell, really. I mean, I'm not sure that they don't bring in another back, but in any case, I'm not sure that he's going to get the same workload given the competition with Jalen Samuels, who, I have a ton of respect for Jalen Samuels' receiving abilities. I mean, I think he holds the NC State record for receptions in a season. I mean, he's a very talented receiving back, and I don't think that James Conner is some type of generational talent. I mean, I think he's a decent running back, but I don't think he's anything really special. So yeah, I'd be concerned if I was a James Conner owner right now. I'd be definitely looking to sell.
Biplab, let's shift back to wide receiver here, and this is a guy that in Tyreek Hill that's been in the news again for not the reasons he would want to be. I mean, this is an interesting thing. Like, we don't know what this could turn into. I mean, especially we don't know what the NFL is capable of when it comes to suspending players. You don't necessarily need to be charged or be guilty of anything in order to get suspended. Tyreek Hill, what are you doing with him for Dynasty leagues right now?
Well, this is where it's also a little emotional. I know a couple of owners have had some moral conversations with me, about owning Tyreek Hill or not owning Tyreek Hill, knowing what might have happened. But right now it's all speculation. If I own Tyreek Hill, I'm not going to move him right now because you will be surprised, Balky, some of the trades I have seen going down. I have seen Tyreek Hill being traded for 112, for 110, those kind of trades. And it's hard to find value. I've seen Tyreek Hill go for, I think, Brandon Cooks. That's probably the best I've seen, as a straight up trade. But I know some owners have the philosophy, if you have a stain on your character, I have nothing to do with you. And we've seen that with Justin Blackmon and Josh Gordon and where those things ended, right? If I own him, I'm holding him. I will buy him for a late first, but I'm also not going to be proactive and spend a couple of 2020 firsts to get Tyreek Hill until this thing comes out in the open and settles. Because you know what? If he has really done it, I don't think he will play again in NFL. It's not like you'll be suspended for a year and you come back. Because if that kid's arms were broken by him, I don't know how he plays in NFL again.
No, you make a good point, and that's something that certainly all Dynasty owners are going to have to consider as they ramp up for 2019. Guys, we got a couple minutes left. I want to close on a trio of rookie running backs from last year, and now that we've seen how they've acclimated themselves to the NFL, well, at least for two of them they have, I want to get your thoughts on him. Steve, I'm going to pitch the first one to you, and that's Nick Chubb. Kareem Hunt goes to Cleveland, and certainly after his suspension, he's undoubtedly going to play a significant role in that backfield. How does Nick Chubb's dynasty value change now, knowing that John Dorsey decided to bring in Kareem Hunt? And granted, I believe it was just a one-year deal, so we'll see what happens at the end of 2019. But how does this change Chubb's value right now?
Well, again, I'm a huge fan of Nick Chubb. So for me, this is, if anything, a big buying opportunity. If people are going to downgrade Chubb because of the presence of Kareem Hunt, then and you can get him for less than he's worth, then that's a great win. I think we're seeing a bit of an overreaction to the presence of Kareem Hunt. Like I said, I believe Nick Chubb is a generational type talent. When I saw him, when I studied him on film and watched him go through the line of scrimmage, my first reaction, wow, that's Emmitt Smith. To me, he's that good. Now I get that there's concern about receptions, but I still think, like Leonard Fournette does, he'll get enough receptions on first and second down to, as the coaches mix it up a bit. And he's got a ton of yardage and touchdown upside on a team whose arrow is pointing straight upwards in Cleveland. So, I think for me, he's a hold right now if you own him, and he's a buy if you got a chance to acquire him.
Biplab, there was one player that scored a touchdown in this year's Super Bowl, and it was Sony Michel. And he really came, he had that knee issue during training camp and really was kind of late to the party, slipped in a lot of drafts. Your thoughts on Sony Michel as far as Dynasty goes, given that there's no Rob Gronkowski, at least right now, in New England.
Yep.
And there's no Josh Gordon. I mean, we'll see what happens with that, but there's a lot of moving pieces right now for the Patriots. But you think about them investing not only a first-round pick in Sony Michel last year, but also, and I'm forgetting that the lineman from Georgia who got placed on IR, I think it was Isaiah Wynn, I want to say his name was, got placed on IR before the season started. He's going to come back to really bolster that offensive line. Is Sony Michel, is his value pointing up right now? Is it going straight ahead? How do you feel about Michel as far as Dynasty leagues go?
Well, I know a lot of Dynasty owners still have question marks about Michel because he plays for the Patriots and some of the stuff you talked about. I was actually a huge Sony Michel fan coming out of college, more than Nick Chubb, just to be honest on this conversation. And, I still own him, and it's not that I will hold on to him forever, but I think to move Sony Michel, I will need a really, really big offer that I can't refuse, right? Or an upgrade. But I think he is as versatile as Kamara. I think we have just seen the tip of the iceberg there. I mean, look at the off season and how he dominated as a rookie running back. I think he smashed some records and created some history. And I do feel he just gets better from here. The challenge is that he has one of the best pass catching backs in the same team, which is James White. And that kind of dings his value a bit. But I think both of them can thrive in that offense, considering Brady is getting older and they are more trying to switch to a running offense and a running back based team.
Steve, I'm going to pitch the last one to you, and we'll close with, man, I had the 102 pick in a Dynasty league last year, and I really was torn on what to do with it, and I basically took the one guy who had no effect on leagues last year, and that was Darius Geis from Washington. I'm really concerned. I was really concerned. I still am somewhat concerned about this new injury, although I did read a report today that he's expected to be a full go for training camp, which I guess is good, if it is true. But, with Darius Geis right now, man, and call me crazy if you think I shouldn't be doing this, but the first kind of big move that he makes in preseason, that first 20-yard run he rips off or anything like that, I still have severe concerns about this knee. I'm going to look at moving him, for 90, 95 cents on the dollar. I'm not going to give him away. But this is a guy that I'm super nervous about having on my team going forward. What about you?
I own guys in one league also, and obviously, like you say, he's a hold right now. Coming off the injury, you can't get fair value for him right now. Equally well, I think it's hard to see how you would go out and acquire him, since he does have this injury history, and since his value is based entirely on his college resume and where he was drafted. So, until we see him on an NFL field, like you say, we won't know for sure. I think he'll be difficult to move, based on one preseason game, though. I think people are going to want to see him play in a few NFL games, and then I think we'll get a sense as to where he is. But again, I do think if he performs well, and that he's not on the injury report or questionable all the time for the first half of the season, if he looks as though he's over the injury, people could forget about these worries pretty quickly.
All right, I've just made his leash longer on my roster now, so we'll see how it goes with Geis. But I want to like him. I mean, I obviously took him second overall, so I do want to like him. That's the only share I have of Geis, and we'll see what happens. It is going to be a lot of fun watching him go forward as he gets healthier. And this was a lot of fun tonight, guys. A lot of great Dynasty strategy talk. We got into some player evaluation with both of you guys. I learned a lot of how you guys like to operate your dynasties, and certainly some good tips of how I can operate mine better going forward as well. Thanks so much for popping on the HSFF Hour with me this week, and best of luck to you in all of your leagues going forward, guys. And I'll let you go now so you guys can talk trade with Antonio Brown.
Well, thanks very much, Boogie. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, same here, and nice to talk to both of you. Have a good night.
Biplab, Mandal, Steve Lee, thank you so much for coming on. Thanks to the FFPC, Rob, Bryce, and of course each and every one of you for listening. Next week, Dizzle is off again, but I will have 2018 FFPC Bare Knuckle Champion Monty Fan. That will be on at a special 9/8 Central time next Friday. So an hour earlier, we will have Monty Fan on. Check out the Maiden Dynasties and the 2019 Best Ball Leagues at myffpc.com. And as always, your weekend officially starts now.
This has been another episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour presented by myffpc.com that was broadcast live and heard around the world. Eric and Dave will be back next week with more analysis, interviews, and advice from a guest much smarter than they are. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk with you again next week.
We're on the cement floor, even more so if we on tour. Me and E explore the country, wondering about the evening before. Trying to explain where the time went, while other rappers find a studio to grind in.